So in your groups, I want you to take, this is only a 5-minute exercise, ask each other, well done, introduce yourselves, that's a good start. Ask each other a couple of questions. It's just getting to know you stuff. Welcome everyone. What was the best question that got asked in your group? Any interesting questions? What do you enjoy doing? Good, yeah. What's your favorite meal? Oh, nice. Wow, good question. Most dangerous thing you've ever done. Nice, nice. So, some bit of creative thinking, good. So, this is all on the theme tonight. Tonight, and we're going through our 4 loves at these vision evenings. We've done Love Jesus, part 1, Love Jesus, part 2. We've done Love People, part 1. Tonight we're doing Love People, part 2. In fact, it's a bit of a cheat, this, because all of our vision and all of our different banners and all our 4 loves, really, they're all Love Jesus. All the heart of everything is knowing we're loved by Jesus and loving him back. Love Jesus. But how do you express that love for Jesus? Of course, you've got to love people. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. All the law, all the prophets, everything God wants to tell us summed up in those 2 commandments. Love Jesus. It all comes from this. It's because of the gospel. Because we're all united in the good news of Jesus, in God's grace. We're all welcomed in by God, even though we don't deserve it. And so we have to love people when we've experienced God's grace in our lives, God's love for each one of us. So we want to love people because we're in the people business. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. Not actually lost sheep, not actually lost businesses or lost countries, lost people. Jesus came to seek people. We are building his kingdom one life at a time. So last time, we focused on loving one another, loving people within the church family, and how we can build strong, real relationships with one another, how we can create community where we truly love one another. Tonight, Love People Part 2, we're looking beyond the church. We're looking, how do we welcome and love those outside the church into our church family? How do we show God's loving welcome? And in fact, really tonight, the whole of tonight's session is focused on this one thing of being welcoming, of welcome. It's such a key component in being a healthy church, being a loving church, being a church that God uses, being a growing church. Welcome. Are we a welcoming church? That's absolutely at the heart of our vision, one of our highest values. How can we be a welcoming church? We welcome others because God has welcomed us in Christ. Ephesians 2, verse 13, we're preaching through Ephesians at the 9 a.m. communion service, says this, but now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ. We've been brought near. We've been welcomed in, been brought into God's presence, not through anything we've done, not through any of our own goodness or worth or that we deserve it, but just by God's grace. He's reached out and welcomed us in, brought us near to himself through the blood of Jesus. Wonderful. There's a prayer actually that comes after communion, one of the prayers in the liturgy that we pray sometimes. I love the words, Father of all, we give you thanks and praise that when we were still far off, you met us in your Son and brought us home. That image of being brought home is picking up the sort of picture of the story of the prodigal son who went off, rebelled against God, went to a far country, squandered all the wealth that his loving father had given him, and then he came. He returned home, and how was he greeted? With outstretched arms. He was welcomed, embraced, hugged, welcomed home. That's God's heart for each one who will come to him. We who were still, when we were still far off, you met us in your Son and brought us home. And actually it's the song that I asked Stuart to play for us tonight as we worshipped and sung as we arrived. Come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart just as you are. Come to worship. Come just as you are before your God. The only reason we can come just as we are, without having to jump through any hoops or, purify ourselves or make us right, is because of God's grace. Come just as you are. Come. You're welcomed in. And when you get that, when you grasp this good news of grace for yourself, that this is for, you realize this is for everyone. This good news, this welcome, God's welcome, God's grace, God's kindness, God's love, God's forgiveness, God's welcome, this isn't just for us, this is for everyone. The gospel, the good news of Jesus is open to everyone. This is not a private club. It's not a sort of members-only thing where, we're all on the in crowd and sorry, you're not welcome anyone else. This is for everyone, for every single human being. All are welcome. And that simple, from the song, that simple message, come. You're welcome. Come just as you are. Come and join with us. Come and worship. So I think that this idea of welcome, really it presents us a question. What kind of church do we want to be? Do we want to be an inward-facing church or an outward-facing church? I've got this little illustration, James. You've got the arrows pointing in. It's a sort of graphic. So, do you see black arrows pointing in? Because you can see white arrows pointing out, but focus on the black arrows. So that's black arrows pointing in. And that's just representing a church that's looking in on itself. There's a lot of churches like this where we're very, very focused on ourselves, very focused on how we do things, making sure that everything's just right, how it should be, how we live, making sure we live just right. All these good things. We want to make sure we live right. Making sure that everyone keeps the rules, making sure that everyone gets in line, making sure that our doctrine and everything that we believe is all absolutely correct, and there's a real inward focus on ourselves. Now, there's a place for right doctrine, there's a place for, of course, right practice, all these things are important, but is this the focus? Is this the purpose of our church? In on ourselves? Or, if we flip the graphic round, so now can you see the arrows, black arrows are pointing out, all we did was change the black for the white. It's just representing, are we a church that's focusing out? Thinking, how can we show God's love to the world? How can we show God's love to those who aren't part of this church? How can we welcome those who are not already part of our fellowship and out of our family in and make them know and understand that they're loved and welcomed just as they are, and God loves them and wants to transform their lives? So I don't know if it really works, but the sort of optical illusion a little bit with this graphic is that when it's this way round, it looks bigger. I should have put them side by side. That looks smaller. But when you flip it round, it looks bigger. Because it's exactly the same size, actually. But it's because we're looking outwards and we're focusing outwards. What kind of church do we want to be? Jesus' community, the way that he operated in the Gospels, when we read about him, he sort of redefined what it means to belong. Because in any religious community, there's a very clear hierarchy. The people who are the most learned and the most righteous and the ones who know the most, they're right at the center. They're at the top of the hierarchy. And then those who are, learning and sort of being apprenticed in some way are a little bit lower. And then it goes all the way down to those who are right on the fringe, and certainly those who don't fit, don't behave in the right way, don't believe the right things, don't have the right friends, don't have the right experience, don't have enough knowledge. They'll be right outside. And there's a sort of, a concentric community model. You know who's at the center, and you know who's at the edge, and you know who's not part of it. So can you put my spots up, James? So this is how you could represent that. You could say God, this is God in the middle, and this is representing, these spots representing people. The people who are closest to God, they're right at the center. They're the ones who are most accepted, have the most significance in this community. And then the people further away, around some further orbit, we put a circle around it. If those are outside the circle, it's very clear you're not part of it. You're outside. So that's a typical sort of concentric model of a religious community. Any community, actually. But Jesus completely turned this around, because the people who were supposed to be the top of the hierarchy, the closest to God, he didn't get on with them too well, most of them. He was always arguing with the Pharisees, and they were threatened by him, and he had lots of confrontation and lots of disagreement with them, the religious people. And then the people who kind of traditionally had been excluded, like the Samaritans or the prostitutes, the sinful people, the tax collectors, they somehow were part of Jesus' community. Some of them, some weren't. It was just a real kind of hodgepodge. There were some Pharisees who followed Jesus, and so Jesus didn't sort of define himself like this. But we put the arrows on the next one, James, it just, with Jesus, it doesn't matter where you are to start with, it matters which way you're facing. People who wanted to move towards Jesus, you see it in the Gospels again and again. The people who were drawn to Jesus, who took a step towards him and wanted to discover more about him and put their faith in him, even though their lives might have been in a complete mess. They might have had very little knowledge of, what the religious rules were. They might have been from a different ethnic group that weren't even part of the Jewish community. These people who were traditionally excluded and right on the fringe, or, outside the club, suddenly Jesus was relating to them as his closest friends. And some of those who were closest were so angered by Jesus, their arrows pointing right in the opposite direction. They weren't part of Jesus' community at all. So this is no longer a sort of concentric model of who's close and who's obviously visibly, part of the top hierarchy and the people. This is now suddenly a complete mix. And it's not about where you're located, if you like, in this model. It's about which way you're facing. And this is the welcome of God. Anyone who faces towards Jesus, anyone who wants to know him, anyone who's drawn to him, is immediately welcomed as part of his community. Even though they might have, made all kinds of mistakes, they might be all mixed up about what they believe, they might be in a total mess, but if they take a step towards Jesus, put their faith, put their trust in him, they're part of his friendship group immediately. It's wonderful. It's amazing. They don't have to jump through hoops. They don't have to do lots of training. They don't have to have certain special beliefs and practices. Jesus breaks down the barriers, and he redefines who's at the center, who's included, and who's excluded in the most extraordinary way. Nowhere is this more clearly demonstrated than in John chapter 4, when Jesus meets the woman at the well. Let me just read a few verses from John chapter 4. Now, he had to go through Samaria. He came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph, and Jacob's well was there. And Jesus, tired as he was from his journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. It's one of my favorite stories in the Gospels. Of course, it goes on that the woman responds to Jesus. He has this amazing conversation with her. She is blown away by Jesus. She responds to him. He tells her that he's the Messiah. She believes him. Then she goes back into the town. She tells everyone. She's one of the first evangelists, one of the most effective evangelists in the whole gospel. She goes back, tells everyone that she's met the Messiah. She's met Jesus. Can he really be the Messiah? They all come out and meet him. Then they persuade him to stay. He goes and stays in that town in Samaria with the Samaritans, eating and drinking, living with Samaritans for 2 whole days. And the whole community come to faith in Jesus. I mean, it's such a marked contrast. He's with the religious Jewish leaders who know their Bibles. They know the law of God. They're living totally devoted lives to God. Jesus comes to them and they fight him. They reject him. They're threatened by him. They just criticize him. They want nothing to do with him. Then he goes to this Samaritan town. Jews, it says, I mean, it's so understated because Jews didn't associate with Samaritans. I mean, that's the understatement of the whole Bible. Jews hated Samaritans. Samaritans hated Jews. I won't go into their history, but there was a deep, deep rift between these two people groups who felt they'd betrayed one another and really kind of this deep-rooted animosity that existed between these two groups. And they wouldn't speak to each other. They wouldn't associate with each other. I mean, the idea of eating together with all the Jewish food laws that, a Jew would sit down with a Samaritan and eat at the same table. I mean, it was unthinkable, unthinkable. And Jesus said, will you give me a drink of water? I mean, to receive from, and, he wouldn't have spoken to a woman anyway. That was totally, unacceptable, let alone a Samaritan woman. I mean, it's hard to convey just how, mind-blowing this is for a Jewish audience to read this account. Think, what? He had this interaction with a Samaritan woman. And of course, so on my picture with the spots and the arrows and stuff, I mean, the Samaritan woman is just way, way at the extreme. I mean, she's excluded. She is unclean. She is wrong in every respect. And obviously, this particular Samaritan woman, I didn't read the whole story, but she's also got a history. Jesus says, bring your husband. She said, I have a husband. He says, yeah, because you've had 5 husbands, and now the man you're living with isn't your husband. So there's sexual sin in her life. There's this questionable past. She's as unclean as you can get, in that culture. Certainly for a first century Jewish man to be talking to this woman, he wants, you'd want nothing to do with her. And she's right on the extremes of being excluded and rejected and judged by God as far as the contemporary religious thought would be. And Jesus welcomes her in. Jesus, he just relates to her, forms this relationship with her, draws her in. So, her arrow is pointing straight at Jesus. It's like, wow, I found something amazing. This person could he really be the Messiah? She puts her faith in him, and he forms this relationship with her. And she is one of his closest companions for those few days. He lives with her. He shares his life with her. He works with her. She brings people to him. They come to faith in Jesus. It's amazing. She's right on the extreme, but because of the welcome of Jesus, she becomes one of his inner circle, one of his closest companions for those few days. You see, of course, Jesus wanted to speak to her. He wanted to evangelize her. He wanted to tell her about the good news of the kingdom of God. He wanted to tell her that he was the Messiah. He wanted to tell her that forgiveness was available, that salvation could be hers if she put her faith in him. But how does he go about this conversation? He starts by making himself vulnerable. He doesn't go up to her and say, hey, you need forgiveness, and I can give it to you. He goes up to her and says, could you give me a drink? He says, I'm in need. Could you help me? And in that moment, he gives her this value. He says, I actually need you. I need your help. He gives her this value. He honors her in that way. He recognizes that she has something that he needs. He recognizes she has gifts, she has potential, she has qualities, and he can receive from her. She has something to bring to him. Her service is valued in that moment. And he turns this whole idea of welcome and hospitality kind of on its head, because he's actually welcoming her and showing her grace, but he asks her to welcome him by asking for a drink. It's just so clever. But he conveys that God accepts us, welcomes us, values us, loves us. This grace, this amazing welcome of God, this is why the New Testament has such a strong emphasis on welcome and especially on hospitality. That we show God's welcome, we show God's love and his grace by welcoming people, not just into our homes, but into our lives, into our church, by welcoming people, not just those who kind of fit the mold, those who kind of, are all right on the outside, but anyone, whatever background, whatever their issue, if they're taking a step, if they're seeking God, if they're open, they're welcome, welcoming people in. Just a couple of verses, 1 Peter 4, verse 8 and 9. Above all, love each other deeply. That's love people. We're making the connection because love covers over a multitude of sins. It's a beautiful verse, that, isn't it? Love covers over a multitude. We've all got sin. We've all caused problems with sin. We're all damaged by sin. Sin is pervasive in our society, in our lives. What can cover over sin? Love. Love. Love covers over a multitude of sins. Okay, what does that look like in practice? Verse 9. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. We want to be a church that loves people, that shows God's love and God's grace to everyone. Let's be a church that does hospitality. Offer hospitality to one another like that without grumbling, okay? You've got to do it, happily. Hebrews 13:2, of course, takes it even further. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. What an amazing verse. So, the strangers who arrive, the people we don't know, perhaps some of the people in the room, are angels in disguise. Welcome them. But we might be showing hospitality to angels. Well, Jesus takes this idea of God's welcome and welcoming angels unbeknown. He takes it even to another level when in his parable in Matthew 25, parable of the sheep and the goats. I'm sure many of us know it well. Let me read you a few verses. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, Jesus says, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance. The kingdom is prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was ill, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And the people say, what? When? We never welcomed you in. We never invited you. We never clothed you or fed you. What are you talking about? And Jesus says, when you did it for the least of one of these, you did it for me. And then, of course, he turns to the goats. I mean, it's a challenging parable and says, you lot, get away from me because I was hungry. You never gave me anything. I was naked. You didn't clothe me. I was excluded and you never welcomed me in. You never showed me hospitality. Get away. And they said, what? When did we reject you, Jesus? When did we reject you? So when you didn't do it for the least of these, you didn't do it for me. So Jesus is actually saying, when we show hospitality, when we show welcome to those, especially to those who are often excluded, we are actually showing that love, that hospitality, that welcome to him. Like I say, we're only loving Jesus. When we love people, we're only really loving Jesus. He says, when you do it for the least of one of these, you do it for me. You do it for me. When we come to church, there's a whole room full of people. And there's a few people who are new, are not sure what they believe. There are a few people who are just trying it out. There's a few people who perhaps, have had difficult lives, and are not sure what to believe or where they belong. Who's the most important person in the room? They are. Jesus says, here I am. Jesus says, here I am. When you welcome them in, you welcome me. When you do it for the least of these, you do it for me. Jesus is here. We've got to find him and welcome him in and show that we love him. Benedict, Saint Benedict, the original pioneer of the Christian community, set up the first monastic communities, and the rule of Benedict, which has become a sort of monastic rule down the generations. He wrote this. This is one of his rules. Let all guests, when he's talking about their community that they're living in, let all guests who arrive be received as Christ, because he will say, I was a stranger. Obviously, he's quoting Matthew 25. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me in. Let all kindness be shown to them. When a guest enters, Christ enters. Isn't that amazing? When a guest enters, Christ enters into our place. Welcome. It's absolutely at the heart of what we believe, of who we are, of God's grace expressed through us in our community. I love this story about someone who went to visit the Bedouin. So the Bedouin are the sort of nomadic people in the Sinai desert in south of Israel and in Egypt. Ancient people who've traveled around from waterhole to oasis, finding a way to live in the desert. Amazing community of people. And they bake bread, but because it's so hot and so dry, they bake this very hard crusted bread that's soft in the middle, but it's got this very, very hard crust because it lasts, can last for several days, whereas if normal bread in that heat would dry up in no time. And this person was visiting a Bedouin community, a village, and visiting the tents. And the master of the community, one of the fathers, hospitality is just Middle Eastern hospitality. Again, it's sort of we're all the wrong way up in the West, aren't we? We consider that if we show hospitality, we are showing some great kind of thing. We're doing some great thing. We're offering hospitality. We're blessing people by coming to us. In that Middle Eastern culture, the honor is all with the person who's receiving. The person who is doing the hospitality is honored. I'm not expressing this very well, but it's kind of the other way around. So, it's far more honored to show hospitality than to receive hospitality. So this Bedouin was saying, wow, you've come all the way. You've come all the way from England. You've come to the desert. You've come to my community. You've come to visit my home, my tent. What an honor to have you in my tent. This is so wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for coming in. And he broke one of the loaves open and said, here, please eat, prepared drinks. And, they ate this. It was very filling, this bread, and, had this wonderful bread. And then he broke another loaf open and said, here, take this one. And they ate more, and they broke another loaf and said, here, please, please take this one as well. He said, literally, we cannot eat anymore. You've filled us up. We've received everything. And then he had about another half a dozen of these loaves. And he just stood up and he broke every one, broke it open, and said, here, see, I have held nothing back. I've held nothing back. Everything I have is here for you because of the honor of you coming to my home. Because he just was so honored to show hospitality that people had come. And it is costly, hospitality. It's costly. You think, what were they going to eat for the next week? He'd just broken all the bread he had open. It was going to go stale now in no time. And it just speaks of the honor of hospitality, but at the same time, the cost. It is a sacrifice, welcoming people and building relationship and seeing Christ in the stranger and in the newcomer and in the person who doesn't fit in and the person who's struggling, and saying, I'm going to prioritize that person. It does mean neglecting the comforts and the other things. And you've got to watch your boundaries sometimes, when you take this to a more extreme measure, having people in your home and, opening your family. And you of course, you've got to be wise, you've got to be careful because, there are people who can exploit you and take advantage of you. But the principle is we have been shown God's welcome and God's hospitality, and we want to show that welcome and that hospitality to others. And it's going to cost us. It's like the Bedouin. It's going to cost us something. It's going to cost our time. It's going to cost our resources. It's going to cost our priorities. It's going to cost, what about my other friendships? What about the people I really just want to hang out with, I feel safe with? Well, it's going to cost us sometimes to prioritize the stranger and welcome them in, because when a guest enters, Christ enters. It was Archbishop William Temple who put it like this, famous quotation: "The church is the only institution that exists primarily for the benefit of the non-members." The church is the only institution that exists primarily for the benefit of the non-members. So yes, we come together, we love one another, we want to be a close family, but the most important people are the newcomers, the outsiders, the inquirers, the guests, the visitors. They're the people that we prioritize, because when a guest enters, Christ enters. And it takes commitment. It doesn't happen by accident. Now, I don't think we got this slide up in time, James. I think I might have sent you one more email, but there was a picture, a photo. Oh, there it is. You got it, James. You're a genius. We went to visit some friends in America a few years ago, and actually Caroline took this photograph. This was actually a picture in the club. It was a croquet club in America. Yes, they do play croquet in America. And it was this picture with all the numbers on the different people. And underneath was a little bit of text. And it said, "Who's the most important person in the club?" And we thought, this is exactly what we're talking about. And they're saying it in this croquet club. And I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but, number one is the club chairman, who runs the whole place and is very important. It said, this person's not the most important person in the club. Number two is the richest member of the club and the biggest donor, and it says this person's not the most important person in the club. Number three is the local politician who knows all the people in the area and is very well connected. She's not the most important person in the club. And so it goes on. Number four is which one is it? I don't know. Number five is the professional, the best player, who everyone wants to play with, teaches everyone how to play. Not the most important person in the club. So it goes on. And which is it? Number 7. This guy is wearing the wrong clothes. He just showed up. He's never played croquet before. He's got no idea what this club's about. He's the most important person because he's the new person. And what it said is, he is the future of our club. He's the future of our club. He's come to have a go. Welcome him in. Give him a mallet and a ball. Let him have a go. Teach him the rules. Show him how to play. Join in with him. Introduce him to other people. Give him your attention. Give him the focus. He's the most important person because he's the future of our club. We just thought it was a brilliant illustration of what the church should be. And not a club, not a private club, but a community that's open to all, an open community that is welcoming to all. So, I'm going to finish, but I just want us to think practically for a few minutes, and we'll have a little discussion in our groups. We want to be a welcoming church, so what does that look like in practice? In practice from the front, what we're trying to do is make everyone feel welcome. So that means we always introduce ourselves. I stand up every Sunday and say, "Hi, I'm Will, and I'm the vicar." You think, why is he saying that every Sunday? We all know Will. We know he's the vicar. He's up there every single Sunday. Well, the person who just arrived today doesn't know that. I didn't get a chance to say hello to them on the way in, and I want them to know, who is that guy? Who's that guy up the front? And, if someone else is leading the service, they introduce themselves, and they introduce the other people who are involved and say, look, this is who we are. We want everyone to feel welcome and to know who's who. It's really important. And we mind our language. Trying when we're speaking from the front, not talking about that kind of language. I'm saying, do people understand what we're talking about? Christians are the worst for jargon and mnemonics and in language. We all kind of know what these things mean. We're talking about YWAM, HTB, and, all these kind of things which some of us might know. Alpha. What are we talking about? It's gobbledygook to someone outside the church. We need to explain what we're talking about and make sure everybody understands, feels part of it. Don't feel like, there's a kind of in language here. Everyone else speaks. I don't speak it. We're fortunate here. We've got the screen, so the words come up on the screen. Everybody sees the same words. But sometimes we use the books, but, have you ever been to a church where you think everyone else knows what page we're on? I don't know what page we're on. Sometimes you go, I don't even know what book we're in. You get 3 or 4 books, and everyone else seems to know exactly what's happening. No, I don't know what's happening. And what's the message? What's the subconscious messages? You're not part of the club. You're not welcome here because we all know what we're doing and you don't. So we're trying all the time to make everybody feel welcome and included. And so that's just from the front, but from all of us, we're all on the welcome team. Might have a few people with lanyards, but every single one of us part of this welcoming community. So let's welcome people. Let's look out for people. When we first did the blend a couple of months ago, we said to everybody, every time you come, make sure you say hello to 3 people you don't know. That's why I put you in the groups tonight. Make sure you say hello. But so quickly, we arrive, we just sit with the people we know, sit with our friends, talk to them, have a nice morning, then home we go. Nice Sunday at church. But there's 100 people in the room you don't know, it's nice to meet other people you just don't know in church, but who are the new people? Who are the people who are inquiring? Who are the people who are searching? Who are the people who don't know what's going on? Can we welcome them? Can we make sure they're included? Can we make them know God's welcome? Great way to welcome people. Ask good questions. How do we make people feel valued, included, like we want to get to know them, like we're glad they're here? By asking good questions. Don't tell them about yourself. Find out about themselves. We want to know all about them. They might ask you a question, but that's why that little exercise at the beginning is so simple. Just ask a few questions of each other. Get to know each other a bit better. I actually come to church with a few questions already primed. I'm going to meet some new people today. What's a good question to ask? I heard a couple of good ones tonight. But, just getting to know, obviously basic stuff. Just, where do you live and what's your family? And, have you ever been to church before? Or, is this all new? What do you make of the place? Do you know other people here? Let's just have a few questions. So not heavy stuff, but ready. And then let's introduce people to other people to make them feel part of the community. If they come in, they have a great chat with you and they go home, then you're not here next week. Then who are they going to talk to? But if you can introduce them to 2 or 3 other people, then they're going to feel connected. It's so important, so helpful. But let's be sensitive. Don't say silly things. It's so easy, isn't it? When maybe it's someone who's not been part of it for a long time, hasn't been in church. We don't know what's going on in their life. And then they pluck up the courage one Sunday to come back. And, we've all done it. So, oh, gosh, I haven't seen you for a while. Where have you been? Wasn't expecting to see you back at church. What do they feel? Oh, no, I'm not coming again. Feeling judged immediately. Instead of, wow, welcome, lovely to see you. So great, how have you been? And sometimes people need space, don't they? I know I can bombard people sometimes with all my questions and wanting to get to know everyone. Sometimes people just, it's quite a thing just to get here, and I just want to have my own space and have a bit of quiet time. We've got to be sensitive to that as well. Not everybody wants to be, but I do remember someone saying, let's break 2,000 years of church tradition. Let's put people off by being too friendly, rather than leaving everyone, How many people have said, I tried a church, I went there, I sat on my own, nobody spoke to me, and I left. How many people have had that experience in church? It's tragic. How can that be church? How can that be the community of Jesus who welcomed the Samaritan woman? And yet we don't speak to people. And just a couple of other things. Join a team. We think, the welcome team are responsible for welcome. But actually, as soon as you're on a team, you're thinking about welcoming people. If you're on the kids team, you're thinking, I've got to make all these kids feel really welcome today. I've got to look after them. Oh, there we go. Well done, James. If you're on the cafe team, you're doing coffee, you're serving people, welcoming them, speaking to them. You're not talking to your friends, you're talking to the people who are coming. You know, if you're on the welcome team, you know, if you're on the youth team, you're looking out for the young people. You know, if you're setting up, you're serving, setting things up, making sure everything's okay as people are coming in. Getting on a team is a great way to have that focus. How can we make this welcoming? How can we welcome people into our church? And finally, welcome. It's great on a Sunday just to sort of make people feel welcome. But actually, that's not really hospitality. That's not really welcome, is it? Because we've got to welcome people not just into our church, into our lives. That's what people are looking for. You know, people want that connection. Want to know that I can be part of this community. I can form friendships. That's what our small groups are for. Are we welcoming people into our small groups? There's one couple, in fact, your mum and dad, Rosie. I remember them saying they arrived, in fact, I don't think it was our church, they arrived at church, at a previous church, in a previous place. The first Sunday they went to that church, they were invited, they met some people, they sat next to them, chatted to them and said, come to our small group. We meet on Monday evenings, come tomorrow. So they met them on the Sunday, they went to the group on the Monday night, and they became part of that community, and they grew up together, and their kids grew up together, and they shared life for 15 years or something. So that one Sunday, and they were invited into a group, that very first Sunday. Didn't have to do a special course, didn't have to kind of, you know, complete a load of qualifications or anything, didn't have to come for 6 months in order before they got to, you know, they just were welcome that one time. Come and join our small group. You know, let's welcome people into our lives, not just into our church. Okay, that's enough from me. I've got 3 questions to put on the screen. Let's go back into our little groups and just take a few minutes. We can finish a little earlier tonight. Let's just take 15 minutes to look at this. What are the barriers that make people feel they're not welcome sometimes? Have you ever felt not welcome? What do you find the hardest thing about welcoming outsiders to the church or into your home? You know, where do you feel the cost? And then let's take a minute just to pray for those outside the church who we would love to welcome in and to know God's welcome. That's what we're about. Love people. Love people by showing God's welcome. Okay, thank you.